If you've spent any time studying the field conditions of World War II, you already know that weather was as much an enemy as any opposing force. Veterans described frozen boots, collapsing foxholes, days of relentless rain, and nights where the cold cut straight through the thickest wool. During World War II, survival didn't just depend on marksmanship or tactics. It depended on whether a soldier could protect his body from the environment long enough to even stay effective in combat. Soldiers went into frozen forests where temperatures dropped far below freezing, slogged across mud-soaked fields of France, and dug into sodden Italian hillsides while the rain never stopped. In those conditions, shelter became more than comfort. It became strategy. Many of the tricks soldiers developed or perfected in the field still work today, and, well, they weren't designed for convenience. They were engineered by necessity through hardship, repetition, and trial under fire. These weren't tips found in manuals. They were the small, hard-earned shelter hacks that kept men alive in the worst weather Europe and the Pacific could throw at them. And the surprising thing is how many of these field-tested methods still apply today, whether you're camping, prepping, or simply fascinated by the real techniques soldiers depended on when survival mattered most. Now let's get into the actual techniques that proved themselves in snow, rain and mud. Soldiers used insulated trench roofs to stay dry when the ground was too wet to sleep on. When the ground was saturated or the foxhole threatened to flood, soldiers improvised a roof just above ground level, creating a raised sleeping shelf inside the hole. Infantry on both sides of the war did this, especially in areas like the Italian front or Eastern Europe, where rain turned foxholes into bathtubs overnight. They would cut branches or scavenge wooden planks, lay them across the dugout, and then add layers of grass, leaves, or even their shelter halves to create a water-shedding barrier. This elevated platform allowed them to stay above pooling water while keeping the roof low enough to maintain concealment. You can apply this method today in a rainy environment by performing 3 steps. First, dig a shallow recess rather than a full foxhole to reduce the chance of collapse. Second, gather sturdy branches or logs to create a spaced platform. Third, cover that platform with your tarp poncho or leafy debris to form a barrier that keeps moisture off your body. It's a practical technique for anyone caught outdoors during prolonged rain because it uses available terrain instead of relying on gear alone. Soldiers didn't have luxury equipment, just knowledge and quick problem-solving. Cold-weather troops built snow caves and snow walls to block wind in open terrain. Snow can be a lifesaver when used correctly, and, well, WWII soldiers stationed in Finland, Norway, the Ardennes and the Soviet front learned that fast. Snow is an excellent insulator if structured properly. Troops would carve shallow snow caves or build low snow walls around their sleeping positions. This shielded them from wind chill, which was often more dangerous than the cold itself. They learned that even a knee-high snow barrier could break the wind enough to raise the internal temperature of the shelter by several crucial degrees. Today, anyone caught in snowy backcountry can follow a similar approach. Create a downwind wall using packed snow, keeping it around waist height for stability. If the snow is deep enough, carve a trench just large enough to lie in. Then place a roof over it using a tarp or branches buried under additional snow. This technique leverages insulation rather than fighting the cold with heat sources you may not have. WWII soldiers didn't have modern sleeping bags rated for extreme temperatures. They relied on shaping the environment, and it's a lesson modern survivalists still use. Soldiers made debris huts when gear was limited and forest cover was their only resource. In forested areas, such as the Ardennes Hurtgen forest and the Balkans, troops often lacked adequate gear or the time to build a foxhole that wouldn't collapse in muddy soil. A debris hut became the go-to shelter. Soldiers leaned a main ridge branch against a tree or stump, then layered branches, leaves, needles and soil until the structure became dense enough to repel wind and rain. The idea wasn't to create comfort, but to trap body heat inside a small insulated chamber. To recreate this today, start with a support beam angled against a tree. Cover both sides with branches until you have a thick frame, then pile debris onto it as heavily as possible. The more material, the better the insulation. These huts work because they shrink the airspace you need to warm with body heat. Soldiers understood that a large shelter would be colder than a small one, and they adjusted accordingly. Even in heavy rain, a well-built debris hut can keep you surprisingly dry and warm, relying on nothing but forest materials. Mudfields forced soldiers to build elevated shelter-halves using improvised poles. In areas like the Eastern Front during the spring thaw or the Italian campaign in late fall, mud made sleeping on the ground impossible. Soldiers responded by suspending their shelter-halves over poles driven into the mud, creating a raised cot-style platform. This kept them above pooling water while maintaining a low profile. Some units used ammo boxes, ration crates, or fallen logs to raise the corners of the shelter. Others simply tied the shelter halves to stakes hammered into firmer soil nearby, creating a taut, elevated sheet. For a modern application, place 2 sturdy branches parallel on the ground like rails. Lay crosspieces over them to form a simple platform, then cover it with your tarp or poncho. If the ground is too soft, use rocks, stumps, or even tightly packed mud as support points. This is a practical method when camping in flood-prone or marshy ground, because it keeps you dry without needing advanced equipment. Each of these techniques is rooted in real battlefield experience, shaped under conditions where failure meant frostbite, hypothermia, or the loss of combat readiness. WWII soldiers were forced to innovate with whatever was available, and that's why their shelter hacks remain valuable today. If you learned something new or appreciate deep-dive survival history, then subscribe to Legacy of Survival and share this guide so others can benefit from real field-tested knowledge.